get started. Good evening. Hope you're all doing well. Today we're learning Maseches Nazir Daf Chaf Daled, and as well we're learning Daf Chaf Hey Amud Aleph. We'll be going until about 5 lines from the bottom of the page. On Shabbos we'll have a shorter shiur. I allotted 35 minutes on Shabbos. I kind of like this move of like choosing how much time to give, especially in the winter months. I'm sorry to hear that. This is an autocracy here. I get to make some decisions against your will. Yeah, that's true. I know no one really knows when it's supposed to be. They look at the clock and then they move on. They just say, oh, is it 4:04? You know, yeah. People, that's what it is. So the Mishnah writes as follows: Ha'isha shenadra ben Nazir, a woman who accepts Nazirus upon herself, v'yifrisha es behemta, and she is this right? Yeah. It's exactly like the last Mishnah. She separates her animals for the Nazirus, and then her husband undoes the Nazirus with his power of hafara. Now, if the animals were really the husband's, so then says the Gemara, the animal can go back and graze with the rest of the flock. In other words, the animal's totally fine. Because the husband did hafara, the animal goes right back to the way that it was, which is a regular animal. However, if the animal had belonged to her, then hachatas tamus. Then the animal is a chatas, and the animal needs to die. And in this case, ve'ola, if she had separated out an ola, then tikrav ola. You can still bring an ola if she had already separated out an ola. The reason why this is the case is because an ola is begeder korban nadava, and even though she had initially intended on bringing it for the sake of nazirus, but lemaisa it can still be brought as a nadava. And shlamim as well, tikrav shlamim. With the shlamim that she set aside, that can also be shechted as a shlamim because it's a nadava. However, with two deviations on the typical rules of a shlamim. Number one is v'ne'echal in the yom echad, whereas a typical shlamim is eaten for 2 days, and ve'enan tu'unin lechem, whereas most shlamim are brought with breads. This one is not brought with bread. All of this is the reish of the Mishnah.
But why isn't it still a chatas? Like, why shouldn't she still bring the chatas? Because isn't making the neder in the first place the chatas?
The Nazirus is the chatas,
right? But
she wasn't the Nazir. He stopped it. She didn't fulfill her Nazirus. He interrupted.
Even if it was for 1 second, she was still a Nazir.
That's a great question. That deserves research. That's a great question.
We said the other night, Mega's guys, right?
We said Mega's guys. Yeah, so it's a very fair question. That's correct. It does seem to be that by the case of Mega's guys, she brought the chatas. Was that the case?
No, the point being, Mega's guys.
No, I know, but wasn't there a Mishnah like that? The Mega
until when it was made. If he's al krumei kara, so there's no. Then my question's out. But we paskin Mega's guys, you know.
Yeah. We do paskin Mega's guys, but we paskin Mega's guys. The question is, does the din of her being a chote for restricting herself from the physical parts of this world, is that only true when she completes her Nazirus, or is it true even in piecemeal? Great question. I don't know the answer. I don't know.
There's really no other case.
What do you mean?
There's no other case where she doesn't complete. She's mechuyev to complete.
Well, I don't understand.
There's no other case other than this where a woman would be a Nazira. In other words, if she becomes Tami, she has to start over.
Well, there's hafara and there's sheila. You can get out of it in 2 ways: with hafara, her doing it, him doing it,
right,
or her going to Bezdin. And
I don't know if sheila works.
Not retroactively. No, but even hafara doesn't work right. Nothing works retroactively. Nothing works retroactively. It's a good question, Tex. I don't know the answer to that. It would have to be your question stands no matter what, because if she keeps it for a minute of no drinking wine. Okay. All right. Next, the halfway through the Mishnah, we had spoken out in the first half of the Mishnah that if a woman were to have separated animals, then the dinim would be respectively what they are, that the chatas will die and the other two can still be brought because they're a begeder nadava. However, what if she only separated money and not animals? And the Mishnah says 8 lines down, hayula ma'os stumin, if she sets aside, let's say, $500 for all 3 animals, then that money is yiplul nadava. All of the money can be given as a nadava. Well, the Gemara is going to ask on this, but the chatas is included in that. How can a chatas be brought as a nadava? That doesn't make any sense. We'll discuss that later in the Gemara. However, ma'os mefurashin, if she separates the money and says, listen, the chatas is 200, the ola is 150, the next animal is 150, in total is 500. So say $500, same money, but she put them in different piles. and she specified what the monies were for, then the halachos change. Then Dmei Chatos Yelchu Liyam HaMelach. Then the halacha is that the money that was set aside for the chatos, that gets destroyed, it gets thrown away. Lo nehen, and you're not allowed to benefit from it. But at the same time, velo mo'alin bahen, you cannot violate me'ilah. It's not really chatos dollars. It's just we try to be makbid on it. It's like midrabanan, or maybe where it's a chumrah. Yeah, it's Yelchu Liyam HaMelach. You're supposed to get rid of the money. No one should benefit from it. So literally, that translates as throw it into the Dead Sea, but it just means. Get rid. It means destroy it. Whatever. It just doesn't mean literally that way. But that's in regards to the chatas. What about the dmei ola? Then yaviu ola umalin behen. The ola is still real, even though she initially separated the ola for nazirus purposes, and now her nazirus is done because her husband did hafara. But still, that animal has the status of an ola umalin behen, and there is even meila in that particular case. And dmei shlamim yaviu shlamim v'nechal yom echad ve'ein tunin lechem. And this is again same as before, that the shlamim that she had set aside, the money for the shlamim that she had set aside, there the din is it can be brought as a shlamim. It can only be eaten for one day, and to unin lechem ve'ein tunin lechem, and it doesn't have the typical breads that are brought. End of the Mishnah. Now, in the beginning of this Mishnah, we spoke about something that's a little bit odd. We said, well, if the animal is his, then the halacha is X. If the animal is hers, then the halacha is Y. And this, says the Gemara, as it opens a little bit more than a third of the way down, is a problem. Mantana de balo mishtabed. It's very clear that the husband is not mishtabed. He's not obligated to give her anything. Why is that clear? Because had the husband been obligated to give her these animals for her nazirus, there would be no difference between shalo and shalo, because he would have given her the animals. By virtue of the fact that our Mishnah distinguishes between Shalah and Shalah, it highlights an opinion of a Shita, the Tanaim, that a husband is not obligated to support his wife as it relates to Korbanos. So Amar Chiza Rabbanani, we're going to see two versions of this Gemara, and this is version number one. Amar Chiza, it's the Rabbanon. The Isal Kadai Tach Rabbi Yehuda, if you want to say that our Mishnah is like Rabbi Yehuda, Amai Teitzi B'tir Be'eder, then when the animal belongs to him, why then would the animal be free to be tira be'eder, to graze with the flock? After all, according to Rabbi Yehuda, hamishtabedla, there is a din, there is a machlokas tanaim, whether or not a husband is obligated to provide his wife with korbanos. According to the Rabbanon, he is not obligated, and according to Rabbi Yehuda, he is obligated to provide her with korbanos. And what's the source for this? Tanya. The Brisa writes a little more than halfway down. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Adam mevi korban asher al ishto, that a husband who's wealthy, when he's bringing a korban ola v'yored, which is really dependent on their tax bracket, so even though his wife owns nothing, but when he brings the korban ola v'yored on her behalf, it has to be an asher because he's wealthy. What do we see from there? That he's mishuban. V'chein kol korban oseha shehi chayeves, and he's also obligated to support her in all of her korbanos. Shekach kasuv la. This is what it says in the Ksuba. Kol achrayis to islich. Alai min kadamas dana. I'm taking upon myself everything as it relates to you. What do we see from Rabbi Yehuda, black on white? That he holds that the husband is obligated to support her. So he cannot be the author of our Mishnah. The author of our Mishnah has to be the Rabbanon. And Rava says, not really. That's not correct. 10 lines from the bottom. Rava Amar Afidu Tem Rabbi Yehuda. We could even explain our Mishnah like Rabbi Yehuda. How could we explain our Mishnah like Rabbi Yehuda if Rabbi Yehuda in the Brisa says that a husband is obligated to support his wife with korbanos, and our Mishnah seems to say that there's a difference in his and her korbanos? So says the Gemara, Ki mishabed la, when is a husband obligated to support his wife with korbanos? That's b'milsa detzrichala. That's only with korbanos that she's obligated to bring. But Nazirus is optional. And because Nazirus is optional, then even according to Rabbi Yehuda, we could explain our Mishnah, because Milsa de lo tzricha lo, like our Mishnah is the case of Milsa de lo tzricha. She does not have to accept Nazirus upon herself. And because that's true, but she has to bring the korbanos, it's Milsa de lo tzricha lo. And that fits even according to Rabbi Yehuda. So Rabbi Yehuda does typically hold that a woman does get her needs and korbanos from her husband, but only that which is letzorech, not that which is not letzorech. And all of this is version number one, because 6 lines from the bottom, Ikad Amre, some say Mantana, who's the author of our Mishnah, who says there's a difference between the animal being his, the husband's, versus the wife. So Amar Chizda, the opposite, Rabbi Yehuda. How could it be Rabbi Yehuda? Because B'chim Meshabed la b'milsa de tzrichala, b'milsa de lo tzrichala lo. Because there was a flip side of what we saw before. So here the Gemara says that really our Mishnah is just like Rabbi Chizda, the Rabbanon, because according to the Rabbanon, lo Meshabed la klal. According to the Rabbanan, they have no shibud. A husband has no shibud of korbanos to the wife at all, 0. If that's true, then how then would we ever have a case scenario that a woman would have a korban of her own? Says the Gemara, it's a case where the husband was makna to her, specifically to her. Since he gave it to her, that's how he would be able to put this in her possessions. And on the top of Chav Daled Amud Beis, the Gemara says, with in version number 2, we could even say that our Mishnah is like the Rabbanon. The Rabbanon were typically the ones of the opinion who says that there's no shibud. So if there's no shibud, how then can they explain our Mishnah? Says the Gemara, Kimaknila, when does a husband give the wife animals for korbanos? That's nami b'milsa detzrichala, only if she needs it. But b'milsa de lo tzrichala, but if she doesn't need the korbanos, then lo maknila. So here we see these two different versions of our Mishnah. One is that our Mishnah is like Rav Yehuda, and the other is that our Mishnah is like the Rabbanon. And in both cases, we say, nah, don't worry. Our Mishnah could be like anybody. And there's ways to finagle to make it work like the Rabbanon and to make it work like Rav Yehuda. We had also said in our Mishnah, 3 lines down, we had said all the details that if she owned the animal, then the chatas gets killed, and the ola and the shlamim get to be brought as korbanos. So says the Gemara, and this was kind of like just beneath the surface from the previous sugya, hi minala, where does she have anything at all? After all, we have a din ha'amris masha kansa isha kanabaila. What scenario is there where a woman has any ownership if the husband owns everything? What?
My question from a few days ago.
Exactly right. What?
Okay.
So then the Gemara says over here 2 answers. Amara Papa she kimtsasa mi isasa. Right, Bar Kamsa, he was very cheap. She was stingy with her dough. The husband has an obligation in the ksuba to feed his wife a certain amount. We learned about this in previous Maseches. And says the Gemara, from the daily amount of food that she got, she rationed. She took that which he gave her, which is halachically hers, and she sold it for coins. And she kept putting coins into the pushka until she had enough to buy an animal. So the Gemara says that because the food that was given to her was completely hers, even though he gave it to her, we don't apply the din of masha kansa isha kansa baila to the food that the husband gives his wife. That's a backwards thing to say. When he gives her this food, it's mamish hers. So that's answer number 1 as to where she would have gotten the money from. Answer number 2, a third party, a cousin, a brother, an uncle, whoever it was, gave her the food, gave her the money. And he says to her, I'm giving this to you, but only al menah she'ein leba'alich rishus bahem. And that actually seems to work, says the Gemara, to make a condition. It's a little bit odd in lumdus. I understand it socially, but
we've seen this before. The second answer we've seen before. The first I can't recall ever.
I've never seen the first one. The second one I don't distinctly recall, but I have a kasha on it, which I didn't think about in the past for sure because I don't remember learning it. And the kasha is that the din of masha kansa isha kansa baila is a din throughout Shas, right? Unless there's something extenuating.
What does he make it tonight?
Yeah, you make a t'nai and override a din in Shas.
It's brought up. I'm
Right.
not clear how the mechanics work.
I don't know how the mechanics work, and it's a little bothersome to me, but nevertheless, we do see, and maybe that's why there's a first answer. It could be that these 2 answers, they don't like each other. It could be. But there is a din that a woman, whatever she acquires, belongs to her husband, and these are 2 exclusions. The first answer is very Svardik, that's very logical, that the food that she receives as a wife, as part of the rights of her ksuba, they're hers entirely. She can do with it as she's fit. So she gets, let's say, 2 loaves of bread. She eats 1, sells 1. Great. She's got 5 shekels. She puts it in the pushka. And every day she gets 5 more shekel. And the animal costs 100 shekel. In 20 days, she buys an animal. Perfect. But the second answer requires some research, because to say that I, as a third party, could make a t'nai on the wife that the regular rule of masha kansa isha kansa baila doesn't kick in, that's a little odd.
Maybe it's not opinion. Maybe it's all technically belongs to the person who's giving it, just letting her use it. So it's not actually, she wasn't actually owning it.
What does that mean? Why doesn't she own it? You gave it to me. Can I bring a korban with it? Yes or no? Do I own it or not?
Well, no, that's what the whole point is, that it's semantics, really. Because it's like she has the rights to it, but she doesn't actually own it.
Yeah, I don't think that's what's happening here, because in our Mishnah it says that im sheloha, if she owned an animal, if you have rights to it, if you can take an animal that you have in your possession in this middle of the road approach that you're describing, and she can shecht it and have no financial obligations to the actual owner, then she owns it. Then she's the owner. We're breaking the rule one way or the other, because at the end of the day she's giving over an animal. So I don't know. I think this sugya requires some research, so I certainly don't fully understand it. Okay, the Gemara says that the next 2 dots, which is 10 lines down, We had said ha'ola tikra of ola, that if the animal was hers, and then the husband had been made for nedareha, that when it comes to the two animals of the ola and the shlamim, v'ashlamim tikrav, that they should still be brought. And what the v'chule here is saying is that by the shlamim that there is no lechem that's brought. And the Gemara says that this was a topic of conversation that will bring us to the top of the next page, which is as follows. Amar le Shmuel le'avu bar ihi. Lo tesi v'karech, you cannot sit down until you explain this thing. Now the Gemara doesn't say what it is, but when you see the answer, you understand the question. I'll just tell you what the question is. The question is, what are all the cases in Shas where we see that a shlamim is brought without bread? You can't sit down until you tell me all the cases in Shas where there's a shlamim, but there's no lechem brought with the shlamim, which is an atypical presentation. And the Gemara says, ve'eluhein, here's the answer. Ve'eluhein arba ayalim, there's 4 rams that are brought, which are brought for shlamim, she'enon tu'unin lechem, that don't have any bread. Shelo, one that is his. V'shela, one that is hers. V'shela achar hamisa, an animal after the owner dies. V'shela achar kapara, an animal after kapara has already been achieved. Shela, the case where she owns an animal, that's our Mishnah Hada Amra. That was our Mishnah. She owned the animal, it says Shela, and then it says Shela, and she's required to bring a shlamim, but without any lechem. That's case number 1. What's case number 2? Shelo, what's the case of him? Ditznan, the Mishnah writes, a third of the way down on Chav Dalad Amud Beis, Ha'ish Madir es beno ben Nazir. A father is able to make his son into a Nazir. Let's qualify just a little bit. It's only a ben katan. You have to be old enough and young enough at the same time. But a father can be Madir his son into Nazirus. Ve'ein ha'isha maderes es bena ben Nazir. But a mother does not have the power to do so. We're not focusing on that part of the Mishnah, but that's what the basics of the Mishnah say. And then the Nazirus is rejected outright. This is unique because it's not a normal rejection of a Nazir. And then Gileach, the son showed his disinterest by pulling out the clippers, the COVID clippers. I gave a lot of haircuts during COVID. So he pulled out the COVID clippers and he's like, I don't want this, I'm shaving my head. Or his cousins, his aunt, other family members give him a haircut showing that he's not interested. Or Micha, or he complains, then it doesn't apply. Now, in this case where the child was forced to be a Nazir and then it was canceled, Hayulo Ma'ustumin, had he already set aside general money, then Yiplulin Udava. Then all of that money, which represents the Chatas, the Ola, and the Shlamim, all of them are Yiplulin Udava. They all go into the pot for Korban Udava. However, Ma'us Mefurashin, if the money had already been set aside, even though in the end he rejected the Nazirus, if the money was set aside in piles of Chatas, Ola, and Shlamim, then Dmei Chatas, Yelchul Yamamelach, that money gets tossed away. Dmei Ola, the money of the Ola that the child had set aside, is Yaviu Ola Umoal and Bahen. There we have a regular din of a korban ola that it still needs to be brought, even though the Nazirus is gone. But once you set aside the ola, it needs to be brought. And umal and behem, there is a din me'ila by these olas. And dmei shlamim, this is our line that we need. Yaviu shlamim v'nechal and yom echad ve'enan tu'unin lechem. Remember what we were discussing. What are the 4 cases where we bring a shlamim that don't require bread? So we discussed the case of Shalah, that was our Mishnah, where her Nazirus was undone, and we said she has to still bring the shlamim, but without bread. Case number 2 is the bar mitzvah, the under bar mitzvah age boy, where he was made into a Nazir, and the father separated korbanos from him, and then the kid rejected it outright. There too, that's case number 2, where a shlamim is brought without bread. Halfway down, what's case number 3, where a shlamim is brought without bread? Says the Gemara, Shela achar misa minalan. After a person dies, what's the marimakom where we see that this shlamim is brought without bread? Says the Gemara, Detanya. Hamafrish mos lenaziraso, a person who separates monies for their korbanos of nazirus, lo nehenin velo moalen behen. That money you should not benefit from, but there's also no meila. Why? Mipnei shehein ru'uyin lahavi bechulan shlamim. All of it can be brought for a shlamim. Okay, this also requires research, but it's not really the ikar of our Mishnah. What is the ikar of our Mishnah of this brisa? Is it changed to a Mishnah? Yes. Mace, if he dies, v'hayu ma'us stumin. If the man dies, remember our case, we're looking for a case of la'achar misa after a man dies, but he had separated away korbanos before he died. So then yiplu l'nedava, but maus mefurashin tmeichatas yolich li'amamelach lo nenin v'lo mo'alin. That if he had separated funds, then this guy also, same dinim as before, the chatas, the money goes away. He should not benefit from it, but there's no me'ila. Tumei ola yaviu ola umoalen behen. The ola is the real deal, and if you mess around with that, then you will get meila. And here is case number 3. Dumei shlamim yaviu shlamim v'nechalan liomechad ve'ein tunin lechem. The korban shlamim has to be brought, but it's brought under different circumstances where there is no. Says the Gemara, where is it over here? It has a shorter period of nosar. It's only ne'echal and yom echad and ve'ein tun and lechem. So now we have 3 cases of a korban shlamim where it's brought without bread. It's the case of Shelah, which is our Mishnah, Shelah, which is the case of the boys beneath bar mitzvah, and the case of Achar Misa, which we just saw over here. What about the last case, Shelah Achar Kapara? How do we know that a person after Kapara brings a shlamim but without bread? Says the Gemara, Svarahu. It's a rational answer. Shalachar hamisa maitam. Let's go back to case number 3. Why is it that we said that after death that a person brings a shlamim but without bread? Because the lo chazi lekapara. Once a person dies, you can't get kapara after you die. That's why we say vidui by the deathbed. By a shchiv meira, we say vidui because we don't want them to go to shamayim with any averas at all. Got to get rid of them. Shalachar kapara nami, and says the Gemara, the same is true after kapara. Once you did kapara, halo chazi lekapara, and therefore the shlamim should not have any bread. In other words, there's a code going on here that we only need to have a shlamim with bread when there is a need for kapara, and in these cases there's no need for kapara. This little part of the Gemara was started out by Shmuel asking, what are our cases of shlamim without korbanos? And we answered, Shelo, la'achar misan, la'achar kapara. Says the Gemara V'suleika, I can find you another case where we see that a shlamim is brought without bread. What's that? 5-6 lines from the bottom. V'ika u'she'ar kol shalmei nazir sheshachtan shelo k'mitzvasan. Any shlamim where the korbanos were not brought properly, ksherim, they're still kosher. V'lo olan lebailim l'shum chova. It doesn't help the bailim; they have to start over. V'ne'echalan liyom echad bein tunin lo lechem v'lo zeroah. Here too, we see that no bread is brought, no animal parts either. But for our purposes, we see that lechem was not brought. So how then can it be that you say that there's only 4 cases? I just found the 5th one. The Gemara responds 2 lines from the bottom. Kimitzvasan kachashiv. We're only answering the question as it relates to mitzvasan when korbanos are brought properly. But if the korbanos are not brought properly, shelo kimitzvasan lo kachashiv, that's not what we're discussing. On the bottom line of the Gemara, this is a question that I was mentioning earlier about the korban chatas. We had said that if a person separates $500 for all 3 korbanos with no distinction, just to say, here's 5 $100 bills. These 5 $100 bills are the total cost for the 3 korbanos of a chatas, of an ola, and of a shlamim, but he didn't separate the monies yet. What did we say? Yiplu l'nedava. So the Gemara says that's not so simple. How can you say that the money goes for a nadava? A chatas is not a nadava. And in fact, the din should be that money is yiplu le'amamelach. How can you just give it as a nadava? A chatas is a different type of korban. It doesn't have the same halachic status as a nadava as the ola and shlamim, which are begeder nadava. So how can you say yiplu le'nadava? So says the Gemara, Machlokes Amoraim. Amar Rav Yochanan, halacha hi benazir. It's a halacha l'Moshe Sinai in regards to the world of Nazirus. What's the halacha l'Moshe Sinai? That when it comes to a person who gives money stam to pay for the korbanos of his Nazirus, halacha l'Moshe Sinai, we don't have to separate the money for the chatas. It's a very odd halacha l'Moshe Sinai, but nevertheless, that's what it is. Reish Lakish argues. Reish Lakish says, you don't need a halacha l'Moshe Sinai. I've got a pasuk in Chumash. What does the pasuk say? Reish Lakish Amar l'chol nid rehen l'chol nid vosam. What do we learn from this pasuk? HaTorah Amra Mosar neder yehe l'nedava. Anything that's extra with your neder gets given for a nedava. In other words, he says that it's a drasha. It's a drasha that the chatas is not separated in yiplu l'nedava, even though the chatas has a higher level of kedusha. Shlamim or kachim kalim. The chatas is the real deal. That's what Reish Lakish said. So we have a machlokas between Rav Yochanan and Reish Lakish as to the reason why we say that when a person separated all of the money into one group instead of 3 groups, that it's yiplu l'nedava. And the Rav Yochanan was of the opinion it's halacha l'Moshe Sinai. Reish Lakish says that it is pasuk in Chumash. So says the Gemara, Bishlam Rav Yochanan de Amar Halacha Hi ben Nazir. I understand the din of the halacha l'Moshe Sinai, amtu lahachi, because the din of the halacha l'Moshe Sinai is structured as it is. Therefore, stumin in when the money is loosely just thrown on the table, 5 $100 bills, we would say stumin. Fine, I understand that's halacha l'Moshe Sinai that yiplul l'nadava, but mifurashin lo. And when the money is separated out, I would not apply the halacha l'Moshe Sinai. Elo the Reish Lakish, who's looking at the pasuk that says l'chol nidren l'chol nidvosa my irias tumin afilu mefurashin. According to Reish Lakish, it's svar that it's a pasuk. The pasuk doesn't seem to distinguish between monies that were put in one pile for all three versus 3 piles, one for each korban. So that's difficult. And the Gemara says, Amar Rava mefurashin lo matzes amris. You can't say that pshat in the pasuk is when Reish Lakish brings the pasuk of l'chol nidren l'chol nidvosam, you can't say that even if it's mefurash, that we would say that it's yiplul l'nadava. You can't say that. Why not? Kfar paska Tana debei Rabbi Shmuel. We already learned this halacha from Tana debei Rabbi Shmuel. Says the Gemara as follows. Tana debei Rabbi Shmuel, rak kadosh. What's the word? Rak kodoshecha asher yihyu lach unedarecha. And says the Gemara, based on this pasuk, bevlade kachim uvitmurasim akasim medaber. The pasuk here is talking about the children of animals that are kachim and the tmura, the swap of animals that are kachim. Matakanas. What do we do with that second generation, either the vladim or the tmura? Says the Gemara, that's simple. Tisa uvasel hamakam asher yivchar Hashem. They should be brought up to the Beis Hamikdash. Says the Gemara, maybe Havamina that I would have thought by the Vlade Kachim and the Tumurasan, what might I have thought? Yachol Ya'aleim, maybe I should bring them up to the Beis HaBechira. I should bring them up to the Beis HaMikdash. V'yimana mehen maimu mazim b'shvil shiyamusu. But maybe we would say these animals need to die. These animals need to be killed because they're the Vladim of Kachim, or they're the Tmura. Says the Gemara, that's not correct. Hamlomar v'asiso ola secha basar v'adam lomar lach kederach she'atanoig be'ola. The same way you treat the ola itself, that's how you treat the tmura, and as well, and the same way that we treat the shlamim, we treat the shlamim. So says the Gemara, and this is where we come in. Maybe we would say that the child of a chatas or an animal that's been swapped for a chatas, that the halacha should be the same, that they're brought as korbanos. Talmud Lomar rak divrei Rabbi Shmuel. We therefore see that when a chatas is separated, you can no longer put it in the category of nadava. Rabbi Akiva Omer, Omer Asham hu behav. He says, based on the pasuk of Asham, that when you're bringing a chatas or an Asham, which are on that genre of kapara type of animals, those can only be brought as they are. So this little sugya here is clarifying something for Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish tried to say that the reason we know that a dmei chatas, when it's given stam, that it's not yiplu liyam melech, but it's yiplu l'nadav, is based on a pasuk. So we said, but the pasuk should also include mefurash, and says that that's not possible because Tan Debei Rabbi Shmuel already taught us that the chatas is different. A chatas doesn't get transferability, and therefore once you separate it, it has to have its own cause, and therefore both Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan can possibly be right. We're stopping right here. We'll pick up on Shabbos, Mirz Hashem, some 35 minutes before Mincha, starting with the word Ketani. We'll learn Daf Chav Hey Amud Beis and Daf Chav Vav, relatively short blot, and then you can see Chav Zayin is also fairly short. And that makes the next few days a little bit lighter. And wishing you all a beautiful night.
Yeah.